Okay, well, let's get started. I'm sure some people will be coming in a little later. Welcome to everyone who is here. Please introduce yourself in the chat if you have not already. We'd love to know what your role is at your school or your district and where you're joining us from today. I also want to mention up front that if you don't have a Listenwise account yet, you can sign up for a free account at listenwise.com. And you can also try out a Listenwise premium account for 30 days. So I really encourage you to start a free trial of premium if you're interested in exploring it. Next slide, please. All right, let's get started. I will be sharing strategies that you can use for substitute teachers with Listenwise. But if you have any other great way that you've used Listenwise with this sub, feel free to share it in the chat. It's great to hear from teachers using Listenwise in the classroom. I'll introduce myself. My name is English Runyan. I'm on the curriculum development team at Listenwise, and I have been working with Listenwise for almost a year. And before Listenwise, I taught high school and middle school ELA in the Fort Worth, Texas area. Some of my favorite things that I do at Listenwise are writing the instructional resources that accompany our podcast. And then I also enjoy creating and sharing professional development materials that help teachers make the most of everything Listenwise has to offer. If you ever have any questions, comments, or feedback, feel free to shoot me an email. And then also, Ava Osman from our content marketing team will be manning the chat today. So feel free to participate there and ask her a question, and then she'll chime in and share it with me, and we can even both give our thoughts on an answer. Next slide. Here's our agenda for today, but if there's anything else that you would want us to share about Listenwise today, put it in the chat and we'll try to adjust that too. So in this webinar, you will learn how Listenwise podcast lessons are super easy to implement. And we'll give you 3 substitute lesson ideas to use for current events. So those are our more hard current event stories or our feature news, and then our weird news stories and our debates. We'll have separate strategies for subs for those 3. There are lots of reasons why Listenwise is such a strong instructional tool. But when I think about my life as a busy teacher, I put on my teacher hat. What I truly love about Listenwise is how it would have helped me um, find and implement engaging podcast for so many purposes really fast. Without Listenwise, you're not wasting time finding something that's good quality, age appropriate, not too long, not too short. We've done all that work for you. We carefully curate our collection each week, and we're creating curriculum. So all you have to do is know your students, know what they need, and choose the right topic or instructional focus. Currently, we have over 2,000 current event podcasts with comprehension and discussion questions available to free and premium Listenwise users. Today, I'll be talking about current event podcasts specifically and how they're excellent for substitute lessons. But in addition to current events, which are published every day, we also have standards aligned lessons. So those are lessons aligned to ELA, social studies, and science standards, and those are for premium users. They have more curriculum materials along with them. With so many podcasts that cover a variety of topics, it's easy to find something that will work for you and your students. Most of our podcasts are short, 3 to 7 minutes long, and some are even shorter. Our weird news are as short as 30 seconds, which means Listenwise podcasts can be great for warm-ups, small group listening activities, or even full class period lessons, or even multiple days. Let's listen to a bit of the current event podcast that was published today. And as you listen, think about this question: why might an assignment related to this podcast work for a substitute teacher lesson? And so as you're listening, if an idea pops in your head, share it in the chat. And then you can also share your answer to that question after you hear the entire clip that I'm going to play. Okay. 8-year-old author hides his book on library shelves.
New book recently entered the catalog of the Lake Hazel branch of the Ada Community Library in Boise, Idaho. That normally wouldn't be news, but the author of this one is 8 years old.
Well, the title is The Adventures of Dylan Helbig's Christmas by Dylan Helbig himself.
And that, you may have guessed, is Dylan Helbig. He loves to read, to draw, and write. He's been making storybooks since he was about 6. He really wanted a book he wrote to be on a library shelf where other people could enjoy it. So, on a trip to the library with his grandmother, Dylan snuck one in.
I covered this part with my hand and the rest with my body so it looks like a normal library book. And I ran in and put it on one of the shelves, and then read a book so I didn't look suspicious.
We'll stop there.
And we had a request from the chat to send the webpage, a link to where to find that.
Oh, happy to do that. We will do that in just a little bit. All right, I know that even though I taught junior high and high school students, I think my students would have really enjoyed hearing that little kid's book. And, you know, it was a good thing that he did, but who doesn't want to read about someone doing something sneaky and not being suspicious? During the school year, there is a new current event story posted every school day. So, like I said, that was the one posted today. There's 2 on Tuesdays and weird news stories on Sundays. The consistent themes of our current event stories shown in this chart makes it easy for teachers to use our podcast and instructional resources to establish routines for implementing them in their classrooms. If students are familiar with the routine, they're a great thing to use for substitute lessons. For instance, our Monday story is typically our most breaking news or hard news story of the week. These stories might work well for secondary level students to use to learn about major national or international current events, and then be able to practice summarizing the details of those events using the 5 whys of journalism. So those are who, what, when, where, why, and sometimes how. I'll talk more about the routines that work well for substitute lessons for our 30-second Sunday weird news stories, and then our Tuesday through Friday more feature news, and then our debate Friday stories in the lesson ideas I'll share shortly. When using Listenwise, you have many options for sharing Listenwise podcasts and assignments to your students. The simplest method, and this works for both premium and free accounts, is just by sharing an audio link, which gives students access to listen to the podcast without any additional scaffolding, like our interactive transcript or any of our comprehension or discussion questions. Teachers with premium accounts can also share assignments with their students that include the additional resources using Google Classroom or other LMS. Lastly, students with premium accounts can access their assignments on our access their own stories and assignments on our platform. So they can select the current events that they want to listen to. And then we know that student choice is really great for engagement, and especially when there's a sub, it might help keep their attention a little bit more. We've made it easy to share Listenwise assignments with your sub too. Our recent blog outlines the strategies I'll share today, and it includes draft instructions that you can copy and customize and then send on to your sub, maybe even send it to your students. The blog also includes links to the graphic organizers that we'll discuss today and that we suggest for each of these substitute lessons. And right now I am putting in the chat that blog. Okay, let's get on to the 3 substitute lesson ideas for current events. Our first lesson idea that is great for subs to use with students is to listen to our breaking news or feature story current event podcast. And for either of those kinds of current events, students can complete the 5 W's organizer or the 3-2-1 organizer. These current events are published Monday through Thursday, and pairing an organizer with them can help support students' comprehension and provide teachers with a formative assessment when they get back of really understanding what their students understood. I mentioned earlier that the 5 whys refer to those 5 fundamental questions that journalists try to answer in their stories. The 3-2-1 organizer is a little more flexible for students and will fit well with less of our breaking news stories and more of our feature style stories. So to complete the organizer for 3-2-1, students list 3 facts that they learned, 2 questions that they have prompted by the story, and then 1 big idea or main idea of the story. Let's listen to a bit of another current event to see how this organizer, the 3-2-1 organizer, would work. The podcast you're going to hear discusses the recent release of old audio recordings into the public domain.
So we have a recording of what's believed to be the first ever audio commercial for a soda. Not only are you hearing some recordings of life at that time, but you're hearing like what the sort of soundscape was, the commercial soundscape.
These recordings are entering the public domain now because of the Music Modernization Act, signed into law in 2018. The law is a relief for people like David Soybert, an archivist at UC Santa Barbara.
I've got tens of thousands of recordings in the archive that haven't been digitized and aren't necessarily accessible because they were protected by copyright.
That's changing now. Independent filmmakers, musicians, artists, anybody will be able to use these pre-1923 recordings in their own projects, free of charge.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed that clip. When listening to the entire podcast, students would also hear an early 20th century exercise tape, which is very interesting, and recorded sneezes and snores too. Even from listening to just that 1 minute of the clip, you can see how flexible and easy this would be for students to complete. They could choose the facts that were interesting to them and pose their own questions. The big ideas section is really good practice for identifying the main idea or purpose or theme of an informational text. Our next sub-lesson idea is using weird news podcasts to focus on vocabulary and pairing them with a Freyer model or a Freyer organizer. I think weird news stories are my absolute favorite. Although they are so short, they pack a powerful punch of academic vocabulary. They are 30 seconds or less, and we feature the academic vocabulary in the discussion comprehension questions that go along with the story. Pairing the weird news podcast and questions with the graphic organizer make for a great routine for learning vocabulary and context. And then if students are used to that routine, it would not be a big deal for them to do 1 or a handful of weird news stories when there was a substitute. So let's listen to this weird news story. It's the Battle of the Joshes.
Good morning, I'm Steve Inskeep. Hundreds of people traveled from across the country to a park in Lincoln, Nebraska, and they were all named Josh. Josh Swain challenged all to a giant fight with pool noodles over rights to the name. Here's the sound of the chaos. I'm not going to say just joshing because the Guardian headline already did. The pool noodle fight was won by 5-year-old Joshua Vincent Jr.
That was one lucky little Josh. Those stories are just so random and fun. I think I would have kept that one in my back pocket and pulled it out every year that I taught a student named Josh. You might be familiar with the modified Freire model you're seeing right now. Or some people call it a word map organizer. Students must define the word, draw a picture or a symbol, write a synonym in English or another language. The expectations for this organizer can vary depending on the age of your students or their level. For example, some students might be able to come up with their own definitions and sentence easily. They're familiar with the word, or they're good at figuring out its meaning from context. Other students might need to use a dictionary and use the sentence from the story to use as the sentence using the word. The Listenwise Premium Text Help Toolbar provides scaffolding for students who may need it. So teachers who have a premium account, all teachers could simply assign this audio, tell their students the words they'd need to use in their organizer and print off the organizer and be good to go. But teachers with premium accounts could assign this as a lesson for their students to do. And so then they have access to more help through the text help toolbar. So I'll show you how that works right now. So this is an example of what students would see if a teacher had assigned them this podcast as a lesson. So it kind of looks like a digital worksheet to them. They could listen, answer the questions at the bottom that incorporate the vocabulary words, and then they could also get help filling out that Freire model. So first, they need to be able to get a definition of the word. This right here is our text help toolbar right there. And I can easily get a definition of one of the words that I was assigned if I was a student. So the word challenged, used as a verb, not a noun. I can highlight and I can get a definition. Students also have that practice of looking through and figuring out the best definition based on the context. Okay, I could also highlight the word, and if I just wasn't sure how I could draw a picture, I could get a suggestion from the text help toolbar. I love looking and figuring out what picture is going to come up. Looks like this guy's getting challenged for sure with that finger in his face by this dude. And then last but not least, the synonym part. Students who speak another language, right now Spanish, could get support there too. So we can get, sorry, this is so small. We can get the Spanish word for challenged. Not only is that really helpful for learning vocabulary, but going through the motions of using the text help toolbar also could be really helpful to students who have those resources on standardized tests that they take online. It can be hard to train students to use the resources that they have, but if they're doing this in a routine every week or every couple of weeks in class, hopefully they'll be more ready to use those on a standardized test.
In English, we had a question in the chat. Can students
Yes.
highlight a word and learn the pronunciation?
Yes, they can. I should have showed that. So yes, you can click the word and then it will say it out loud to you. It also doesn't have to be just one word. It could be a sentence, it could be a paragraph, and it would say it out loud. It would also say it in Spanish. And hopefully in the future, we'd have other language options as well. Thanks for asking the question. Our final substitute lesson idea for today is having students listen to our debate current event podcast and complete our debate organizer. So our debate current events are published every Friday, and they feature an issue being debated in the public sphere. So establishing a debate Friday routine or once a month or even every week with students strengthens their critical thinking skills and makes for a really easy substitute lesson. Instead of doing one, you're going to do two or maybe 3 while you are out of the classroom. Here are some of our recent debate stories so that you can get an idea of what kind of debates that we have. So this was our most recent March 18th debate. Are leaders born or made? The article talk or the podcast talks about Vladimir Zelensky and his background and what kind of leader he is right now. Another recent one during the Olympics was, should Olympic athletes be allowed to protest? A debate that would probably be really engaging for students. They'd probably have a lot to say about it. Is social media bad for mental health? And then another one is debate, does digital art have value? Our debate organizer is a simple T-chart where students list the arguments mentioned on both sides of the debate. Then they write a paragraph that explains which position they agree with, or which side has more convincing arguments. And the discussion question for all of one of the discussion questions for all our debate stories is that it poses the question of, should, for instance, Olympic athletes be allowed to protest? So all the substitute lessons I've shared today will likely include students having to pause or listen again, which is really important for them to do. I, as an ELA teacher, was always telling my students, go back to the text. It's okay to read it again. Stop, ask a question. Sometimes pausing, listening again might be a little more intuitive to students when they're listening, but they're still practicing that important literacy skill.
Speaking of which, we have another question.
Yeah.
Can a student highlight a phrase, not a word, and learn the meaning? So like an idiom, for example, like break a leg. Is that possible?
Well, they can definitely, I think it depends on what the idiom is, but they can definitely hear it said to them out loud. And then they can hear it said to them out loud in Spanish or English as best that it can be translated. That's a really good question, and we'll have to play around and hopefully we can get back to you about it. Okay. As a reminder, the lesson ideas and materials that I discussed today can be found on that Listenwise blog. And each strategy includes drafted instructions like the one you're seeing here. Easy to fill in those blanks, make the changes, add a link or two, and send it on to subs or students. Also, everyone who registered for this webinar will get an email with these slides and then all the graphic organizers that were mentioned. For example, you did not see the 5 W's, but it's pretty simple for students to think about those critical questions that journalists should answer. So as you have seen today, there are many ways you can implement podcast in the classroom and for substitute teachers. If you don't already have a premium account, I really encourage you to start an individual trial, or better yet, invite some colleagues from your school or district to join, and that trial goes from 30 days to 60 days. With premium, you have access to standards aligned lessons, so there's even more support. So we showed you a graphic organizer to use with each of those strategies. Well, every standards aligned lesson has a specific graphic organizer for that assignment that gives you suggestions on how to use it. And then also with Premium, you have access to creating assignments, data tracking, self-grading or automatic grading quizzes, listening supports like the text help toolbar that we showed you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and thank you for participating, asking great questions.